Will Cuylle is back with the New York Rangers on a new 2-year contract. We discuss why this is awesome news, and we also examine how and why Will Cuylle has become such a beloved member of this team.
You're Locked on the New York Rangers, your daily podcast on the New York Rangers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, Blue Shirts fans, to episode number 1345 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, John Chick. Just want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube, and we are, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off of your first purchase. So, yeah, I wanted to go ahead and pretty much make this the Will Cuylle show, just talk a little bit about him re-signing with the team, what it means for the team, why it was so important, and how he's become, as I mentioned just a second ago, such an important and beloved member of this squad. And then at the end of today's episode, also going to point the free agent spotlight at Justin Dowling, who just signed a 2-year deal with the New York Rangers. Going to talk a little bit about Dowling at the end of today's episode. But we begin with the man of the hour, Will Cuylle. He gets $3.9 million per season over the next 2 seasons. And I think the best word that I can use to describe this and describe how myself, and I'm sure a lot of you and Ranger fans everywhere are feeling, is just very simply relieved. There was always that, kind of belief, and I think kind of that expectation that Will Cuylle was going to be back with the New York Rangers, but you never know for sure. And he was a restricted free agent. And yes, a lot of us, myself included, do tend to kind of overblow the way that an offer sheet might be used every single offseason, or how often they're going to be used. They do happen once in a while. They happened twice last season. There were 2 different players that were offer sheeted away from their current team, but they are pretty rare. With that said, though, I mean, you look at Will Cuylle, he was always a prime offer sheet candidate looking into this offseason. I mean, for his own play, just to begin with, and the fact that he is very young, has a lot of upside. And then you look at the lack of available options as far as free agency is concerned. And yeah, I think there was some valid concern there, but it never comes to that. The deal gets done, and Will Cuylle is back with the Rangers for at least the next 2 seasons. Now, is this a fair deal for both sides? I would say yes. The Rangers very likely realized that they were going to have to pay Cuylle more than a typical RFA without arbitration rights would get. Again, that is due to the looming threat of an offer sheet. And you want to get this guy under contract and keep him happy for the foreseeable future. By that same token, I got to give credit to Will Cuylle. It would certainly appear, the fact that this deal got done, that he wanted to be here. And he had to have known, and his camp had to have known, that an offer sheet was at least possible from one of the other teams around the NHL. So he could have played a little bit more hardball, held out a little bit longer, dragged his feet through this entire process. Hope for a longer contract, a more expensive contract, whatever the case might have been. But again, I'm glad that it got done. I'm good with it. It sounds like Will Cuylle's good with it. Sounds like the Rangers are good with it as well. And honestly, why not? Cuylle is a very important player of this team, and I think most Ranger fans, like me, very, very happy that he will be sticking around. And he gets quite the raise here. He goes from $828K a season ago. That was what he was paid throughout his entry-level contract, to now $3.9 million per season. And the Rangers keep one of their most important young players at what I still think is a reasonable cost. So win-win. And I also want to throw this out there as well, because again, for an RFA without arbitration rights, we don't usually see contracts this big given out. There was a stat floating around on social media. I believe Vince Mercogliano was the one that posted it. Cuylle is getting the second biggest contract in terms of average annual value among Ranger forwards who were signing their second ever contract ever. No other Ranger forward on their second contract got more per season than Will Cuylle is about to get. And again, for frame of reference, Will Cuylle is at $3.9 million. If you want to look at the top 5 there, Buchnevich was second at $3.25 million. Then Derek Stepan at $3.08 million. Kevin Hayes at 2.6, and Chris Kreider at 2.48. And, the salary cap has gone up and salaries have gone up. So that also factors in for at least being part of the reason why Cuylle ends up with the biggest contract out of any of those players. But I think this is money well spent. I don't think this is a kind of deal that we're going to be looking at it midseason and think, oh my God, what were the Rangers thinking? They should have traded him. I don't think anybody's going to be feeling that way about Will Cuylle. It just does not seem like a likely scenario. Again, the fact that stat that I just threw out there, it might cause some eyebrows to raise, but to me, again, this is money very well spent. Jury was actually asked about Will Cuylle, K'Andre Miller, and the possibility of either or both of them being offer sheeted. And we're actually going to have an episode on Chris Drury that's very likely going to be the episode after this one, where we talk about him having one of his best days in quite some time, that being the first day of unrestricted free agency. But this is what Drury had to say about the possibility of an offer sheet to Will Cuylle or K'Andre Miller, and how he felt about it. This is what he said. It's within the rules. It's certainly not something that you can ignore. But at the end of the day, we were just happy to be able to facilitate a trade with Carolina for the other pieces we got back, which we thought was a good return, and also be able to use K'Andre's money somewhere else. And like I said, that's just kind of the tip of the iceberg as far as, Drury's comments and what he said to the media. He did meet with the media just yesterday, so we'll get into that in greater detail, like I said, in the next episode, but did want to at least share that quote as it pertains to, the potential offer sheet for either Will Cuylle or for K'Andre Miller. This current contract for Cuylle also sort of begs the question as far as what's next and when can the Rangers, when can they and when should they look to get him locked up, to an even longer term contract? Because right now it's just 2 years. I feel like the Rangers are still mostly in control of this situation with Will Cuylle, because I think most Ranger fans are in the same boat as me. You want to see Will Cuylle be a member of this team for a very, very long time. That's the way things stand right now. I think people are mostly happy, mostly impressed with what he's brought to the table his first couple of seasons in this league. But again, I just said that I think the Rangers are in control, and this is why. Once this current 2-year deal expires, the one that Cuylle just signed, Cuylle at that point will again become a restricted free agent, and he will be a restricted free agent without arbitration rights. So players in that situation, there's only so much leverage they can get. There's only so much they can do with that. The offer sheet could still be a thing around then, and maybe 2 years down the road, teams are using it a little bit more often. We'll see if it happens this offseason, next offseason, or whatever happens there. But again, he will be an RFA without arbitration rights in 2 years, and then 2 years after that, he'll be an unrestricted free agent for the first time. That's assuming that the Rangers don't strike a long-term deal with him before then. So honestly, I'm not too worried about it. I do feel like you might want to start talking long-term with Will Cuylle. Honestly, I would say as soon as next offseason, but no longer than the offseason after that, when he becomes an RFA for the first time. You can lock him up to a reasonable contract at that time. If you're doing it next offseason, I think it'll be fine. When you look down the road for the Rangers as far as how they're going to be looking 2 off seasons from now, and that is again when Will Cuylle will become an RFA for the second time. At that point in time, the Rangers, as of right now, only have 8 players under contract going into that season when Will Cuylle will become an RFA for the next time. So now that number will increase. You got to figure, they'll make some trades, they'll sign some free agents and whatnot, and some guys will be signed longer than that for sure. But the way things look right now, I mean, there's plenty of money to go around. There'll be plenty of money for Will Cuylle at that time, and he's one of your most important players. And I think if you're the Rangers, at some point you want to pony up the dough. My preference would be to go long-term with Cuylle. He is still very young. What is he, like 23 at this point? He's definitely no older than 24. I think he's 23. So next offseason, if you want to add on more years to Will Cuylle's contract and give him another 7 years on top of that and keep the average annual value down as a result of going long-term, I'm all for it. I mean, that would only bring him into his age 31 season, somewhere in that ballpark. So by all means, yeah, this is somebody that, as much as I would have liked to see the Rangers lock him up long-term, I'm okay with this. And like I said, I still think the Rangers are in control of this situation. Everything will be fine. And for the time being, let's just enjoy the fact that Will Cuylle is back with the New York Rangers. But in just a second, we're going to keep talking about Cuylle. There's a question that's kind of popped up recently, or something that I've been thinking about at least. And that's, why is Will Cuylle and how has Will Cuylle become such a beloved member of this New York Ranger team? Because when you look at his stats, there's nothing that jumps off the page, but he's about as popular as any member of the Rangers with the fan base right now. I'm going to dive deeper into that, the reason for that, in just a second. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Gametime. We've all been there, logging on early and waiting forever for concert tickets to go on sale, only to lose your spot for a show that you've been just dying to see. Live music should be about making memories, not dealing with stress of ticket shopping, and that is where Gametime comes in. Gametime makes getting concert tickets faster and easier than ever. Prices actually drop as it gets closer to showtime, and you can save up to 60% off with their killer last-minute deals. Tired of endless scrolling trying to find the best deal? Gametime's zone deals pick the best seats in your section just for you. Ever wonder what your view will actually look like before you buy the tickets? The app shows you a panoramic seat view, so there are no surprises. Absolutely awesome feature, by the way. So take the guesswork out of buying concert tickets and show tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, let's go keep everything rolling here. On Locked On New York Rangers, big shout out to the everydayers, as always, for supporting this podcast. In our next episode, I think I actually mentioned this in the last section, but we're going to take a look at everything that Chris Drury did, all the comments that he made about the moves that the Rangers, had on the first day of free agency, and just talk about the job that he did overall. We're also going to be talking about some of the other New York Ranger free agent signings, some of those under the radar kind of pickups where the players most likely ticketed for the Wolfpack. But we'll talk about those players. And the rest of the draft class, we got to talk about them as well. We already did an episode on Malcolm Spence, who the Rangers obviously took in the second round. You can go back and check out that episode if you'd like. But eventually, we're going to take our time, get through the entire draft class as well. So let's keep everything rolling with Will Cuylle here. And, again, a question kind of popped up for me. Like, why is Will Cuylle so beloved by this fan base? And how did he get to become, honestly, arguably maybe the most popular player on the Rangers among the fans of this team? If nothing else, there's nobody that actually dislikes Cuylle. And there's very, very few players on this team that you can say that about right now. But I think just about everybody is pretty happy with what they've gotten from Will Cuylle throughout his first couple of seasons in the league. But again, it just begs the question, why? How has this happened? Again, we're talking about somebody who has 66 points in 167 games. So it doesn't really grab your attention. And if you're a fan of some other team from around the NHL and you're seeing all the chatter that Ranger fans are having about Will Cuylle and, oh my God, lock him up, we can't lose him to an offer sheet and this, that, and the other thing, you're probably wondering man, why are Ranger fans so obsessed with this guy? But again, I think there are several reasons. I just want to dive into them right now. And honestly, if you want to add to this list, feel free to definitely do so in the YouTube comment section as well. But for starters, how about just the very simple fact that Will Cuylle is a somewhat rare homegrown success story for the New York Rangers? We don't have many of those. If you look at the roster right now, who really fits that description as a New York Ranger homegrown success story? You have to say Igor. And I know, people got on Igor this past season, and that's all well and good. He did have some shaky performances, no doubt about it. But this year's Stanley Cup playoffs, the entire tournament, to me, it just reemphasized the fact that there's no goalie on this planet that you want in a big game more than Igor Shesterkin. So Igor, you can't look at him and say that he's not a homegrown success story. That's one. Alexis Lafreniere, we thought we were getting there, right? As recently as 2 seasons ago, he was breaking out and killing it with Trocheck and Panarin, and they were one of the best lines in hockey. And, he's doing a great job in the playoffs. And then this past season, certainly his game fell off a little bit after signing that contract extension. So he could certainly become that, a homegrown success story. But I don't know that I can call Lafreniere that as of right now, the way things stand right now. JT Miller. Now, this is a weird one because he was drafted by the Rangers. He debuted for the Rangers. He played a couple of seasons for the Rangers. He was part of a lot of winning with the New York Rangers, but then he left and became a far better player at other places in his career, more so the Canucks than the Lightning, but really both of those teams. And now he's back with the Rangers. So in a roundabout way, I guess you can say he's a homegrown success story, but they traded him for nothing. Like that's one of the worst trades in Ranger history, and they basically just gave him away, and then he became a far better player playing for places other than the New York Rangers. So I don't know that we can really count Miller in this category as well. Then you get to guys like Edstrom and Rempe, and the jury's still out. I think the early returns for a pair of 6-round picks are fairly good there, but neither one of them is like a game-changing franchise icon for the Rangers. You never know what can happen going forward, but, it's so far so good with those two. But they're not like top-tier players in the NHL, guys that are homegrown and like lighting the league on fire. I mean, I guess Rempe did, for that first year that he was up in his own Rempe kind of way, but not in a way where, he's really, driving the New York Rangers to victories. I know they have a good record when he's in the lineup, but can't really count them as like major homegrown success stories, but they're minor homegrown success stories. Adam Fox, I think we can count Fox because, yes, he was drafted by the Flames, traded to the Canes, then traded to the Rangers. But, they didn't even really have any time with Adam Fox, those other two teams. He came to the Rangers. It's the only team he's ever played for. Even he had a little bit of a down season by his own standards this past year, but I think we can count Adam Fox in that category. You can maybe throw Braden Schneider into that too. I mean, Braden Schneider has certainly been a solid NHL defenseman, if not a star, but that's not that many when you think about it. And for every player that I just listed there, even the ones that are kind of 50-50, there are countless draft picks for this Ranger team that just have not worked out. And very few examples of true homegrown success stories. So for all those reasons, I think you get a player like Will Cuylle in the second round. He hits the ground running, never looks out of place in the NHL, seems to be a budding star for this team. I think that just makes you appreciate him and like him that much more. Secondly, this is a term that we've seen thrown around on social media. I've probably even used it a couple of times myself. But this is a Ranger team that needs more Will Cuylles, different versions of Will Cuylle, whatever that might be. What exactly does that mean? It means size, toughness, physicality, straight line hockey, forechecking. The fact that you're willing to go out there and hit anybody that moves. He had 301 hits this past season. Hey, how about shooting the puck once in a while? Will Cuylle definitely does that. Instead of always looking for that perfect play, that perfect pass, being too fine with it. Just the little things, man. The things that honestly should be a given. But for anybody that watched this Ranger team this past season, and I assume that's most of you, we know those things were not a given for this team, but Will Cuylle was always out there doing all the little things that I think Ranger fans really appreciate. Third, we're kind of combined two things into one here. He has, in my estimation at least, an incredibly safe floor combined with a pretty high ceiling. These are terms that get tossed around quite a bit as well among myself and anybody else who's into hockey, floor versus ceiling and all that good stuff. Again, the floor, Cuylle has never once looked out of place in the NHL. Even when he was a rookie, you're kind of waiting for that rookie hiccup, that rookie mistake, and it never really happened. And he became a mainstay in the Ranger lineup, very quickly 2 seasons ago. And 3 seasons ago, he was up for 4 games, but we're not really counting that. 2 seasons ago, he became a mainstay. And out of 164 regular season games the last 2 seasons, he's played in 163 of them. So he's always solid. He's never looked overmatched. He's never looked intimidated by the NHL level, just somebody that basically hit the ground running and was holding his own pretty much as soon as he made his debut. And then as far as the ceiling is concerned, I mean, that remains to be seen. But again, this is somebody that's a second rounder and is showing a lot of promise. Doesn't seem to have too many holes in his game. It's the kind of player that you want to hang on to and build around. And honestly, even if Will Cuylle never becomes that much better than he is right now, I mean, I think he will, but even if that never happens, you've still got yourself a very rock solid middle six forward in this league. I don't think there are too many people that would, argue against that. Another reason here, as far as why Ranger fans like Cuylle so much, did you watch the Rangers last season? See how bad they were? You see how many players underachieved and had a lack of effort and looked like they'd be anywhere else, rather be anywhere else in the world other than playing hockey with the New York Rangers? We as a fan base this past season, we were trying so hard to grab on to anything that was interesting or exciting or entertaining or fun. And there was just so little of that. But Will Cuylle at least gave us some of that. We got his emergence. There we go. I couldn't find the word there. We got Will Cuylle's emergence this past season. We got a 2020 season. He ends up with 20 goals, 25 assists. He's out there hitting anything that moves, playing physical hockey, dropped the gloves a couple of times, if memory serves me correctly. And just one of those guys that's not going to back down and it's going to play straight line hockey and is going to play with a certain amount of intensity. And that was a lot of fun, especially when you compare him to some of the other underachieving players on this roster this past season. So I think Ranger fans would have liked Will Cuylle regardless, but the fact that so many guys were driving this fan base nuts last season, myself included, it just makes you gravitate toward Cuylle that much more. Another reason, and we've kind of been hinting at this throughout this entire section here, but the guy just very frankly plays with heart. We knew by mid-November this past season that Will Cuylle was going to win the Stephen McDonald Extra Effort Award. It has to be the earliest that a winner for that award was basically determined. And I know the fans have to vote on it, and you never know what can happen. And we throw out a couple of other names that might be good candidates in addition to Cuylle for that award, whether it's Igor, Quick, Borgen, maybe even Rempe could get that award. You know, those guys were all options, but I mean, let's be real. Everybody knew Will Cuylle could, should, and would win the Stephen McDonald Extra Effort Award this next season. He stood out in a major way due to the effort that he brought to the rink every single night. And one more thing, and this one's just kind of a bonus, but think back to how the Rangers got Will Cuylle. I'll give you a second. Do you remember how they got Will Cuylle? Because it's pretty wild when you think about it, when you really break it down here. The Rangers got Will Cuylle. I mean, they drafted him in the second round. I think most people know that. But do you know how they ended up with that second round draft pick? That second round draft pick did not belong to the Rangers initially. It belonged to the Los Angeles Kings. And the Kings, if I'm not mistaken, actually got it from Vegas. But it went over to a different deal between the Knights and the Kings. The pick is traded to the Kings. And then the Kings trade that second round pick to the Rangers in exchange for Lias Andersson. You heard that correctly. So the Rangers basically flipped a bust of a draft pick, if we're being honest here, to the Kings, somehow got a second round draft pick for it, and then turned it into Will Cuylle. And it's just nice to be on the right side of that once in a while, right? There's times where, you know, Ranger fans, myself included, will kind of lament certain moves that they make, and they ain't get enough for this player, they ain't get enough for that player. The Buchnevich trade comes to mind. The trade that we talked about earlier today when JT Miller and Ryan McDonough were traded to Tampa Bay, that one certainly comes to mind as well. But they've been on the right side of these trades every once in a while, too. And this is a prime example of that. Lias Andersson for a second-round draft pick that becomes Will Cuylle. Don't let a player like that get away. You won. You've already won. You've hit the lottery with a trade like that. So you hang on to Will Cuylle at all costs. So, yep, if you can't tell through the first 22 minutes or so of this episode, big fan of Will Cuylle. Very, very happy that he's back. And for anybody that might have been kind of like what's so great about Will Cuylle, maybe that like answered some of those questions. And like I said, for anybody listening to this or watching it on YouTube, if you've got another reason why, you know, Will Cuylle's your dude, or if you doubt Will Cuylle and you're not so sure what the hype is all about, feel free to let everybody know in the YouTube comment section. But in just a second, we're going to shift our attention to sort of an under the radar New York Ranger free agent signing. That's going to be Justin Dowling, a veteran player, 34 years old. We're going to talk about him and what he brings to the table and if he has a chance to make the New York Rangers in just a second. All right, let's go and wrap up today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers by talking a little bit about Justin Dowling, kind of an unheralded, under the radar, unrestricted free agent signing by the New York Rangers. And to answer the question that I proposed just a second ago, I would say I don't expect him to make the Rangers. Now, crazier things have happened. Maybe he does have a good training camp, a good preseason. Sullivan likes what he sees, and somehow, some way, he actually makes the Rangers opening night roster. I don't expect it, but it's at least possible. But the bottom line, Dowling signed with the Rangers for 2 years at the league minimum of $775K per season. Dowling is a 34-year-old center and winger, mostly played center for the Devils last season, 5'10", 180 pounds, and somebody that's still playing pro hockey despite going undrafted so many years ago. He actually made his NHL debut all the way back in 2011. But as far as his career stats are concerned, 4 seasons with the Stars, 1 with the Canucks, 2 with the New Jersey Devils, 152 total NHL games, 9 goals, 17 assists, minus 22, 54 block shots, and 116 hits. Interesting fact here about Dowling. Last year at the age of 34, he set a new career high in games played with 52. He had never played more than 29 NHL games in any single season before last year. He basically, shattered that mark for himself with 52. And his full stat line last season was 52 games, 2 goals, a career high 5 assists, a career high 7 points, minus 6, 10-13 average time on the ice per night, 48.3% face-off percentage, 22 block shots, 51 hits. So right off the bat, you have to admire the resiliency, the stick-to-itiveness that he has shown over the years, because this is somebody that 34 years old, still playing pro hockey. He's spent a lot more time in the AHL than he has in the NHL. And that's a pretty cool story that somebody, after all that hard work, got to play, 52 games in the NHL last season, even if it was with the Devils. He was still in the show and he was still playing and, at least carved out some kind of a role for himself with the Rangers division rival there. Now, again, I think the Rangers, I don't think they have any delusions of grandeur here. I think they bring him in as an NHL, AHL swingman, somebody that's just sort of organizational depth. Like I said, you never know. He could make the Rangers out of camp. I think he deserves a chance just like everybody else. But I think there's a very good chance that he starts next season with the Hartford Wolfpack. I did reach out to our friend Trey Matthews of Locked On Devils for a quick scouting report on Dowling. I figured, it's kind of a minor signing. We don't have to do a full-fledged crossover episode, but Trey did get back to me and had a couple of things to say about Dowling. He says, career AHL player was mostly in the Devils lineup due to replacing an injured player like Curtis Lazar, was pretty decent at faceoffs, 48.3%. An industrious player, he is an okay playmaker who can put up solid point totals at lower levels. Yeah, so it sounds like, based on Trey's comments here, that Dowling might have sort of been in like the 13th forward kind of a role with the Devils. It sounds like he stepped in for Curtis Lazar on a couple of occasions. And, hey, maybe he carves out that role for himself as a member of the Rangers. We know they're down a forward because Arthur Kaliev was not qualified. And now I forget, Senators. He signed with the Senators, but he's no longer with the Rangers. So maybe there's an opening there, and, Dowling would have to kick it down if he was to get it, but that's kind of interesting to know that he was seemingly in that extra forward role with the Devils. Trey also mentioned Dowling's numbers at lower levels, namely the AHL. And in Dowling's career in the AHL, 573 games, 131 goals, 277 assists for a total of 408 points in 573 games. He's also a plus 14 for his career in the AHL. 7 different AHL seasons for Dowling where he has had 40 points or more. So this is somebody, at least at the AHL, who can be, a reasonably productive player. He had as many as 53 points back in 2018, 2019 with the Texas Stars. And, he's somebody that I feel like you just kind of want to root for a little bit. Now, here's the thing with Dowling. I'm okay with him getting a chance. The one thing that I can't bear to watch this season, and I think a lot of you are going to be with me here, I can't watch Dowling play many, many games like in the Rangers top 9 while guys like Brian Hoffman and Gabe Perreault are watching for the press box. But if Dowling is able to carve out a role for himself and he works his way in there and makes himself a lineup regular, then so be it. He certainly has the right to, set that goal for himself and go for it. I just don't want to see a situation where the Rangers' top prospects, guys that they drafted in the first round, have to suffer for it. That's kind of where I'm at, with this whole situation with Dowling. I think that, more likely than not, like I said, he's going to end up starting in the AHL. And I sort of see him as like the new Riley Nash for the Hartford Wolfpack, because just like Dowling, Nash was 34 when he signed with the Rangers. It was also a 2-year deal. And both of them kind of fit that bill of like, okay, this guy has NHL experience and, he can produce in the AHL offensively, and he can set a good example for some of the young players in the AHL. I think that's probably the most reasonable role for Dowling. That's probably the most reasonable thing that we can expect. Also worth pointing out that Dowling, throughout various stops in his career at various levels, has worn letters. Among the times he has done so, whereas the captain of the WHL's Swift Current Broncos, he's also been an alternate captain and the captain of the Texas Stars, and most recently, an alternate captain for the Abbotsford Canucks. And if you look at the Wolfpack and their leadership group, they've got Casey Fitzgerald. He is the captain. He became the captain last season. He's under contract for one more season. Anton Bleed just signed a 2-year extension with the Wolfpack. I like Bleed. Bleed does a good job for them. He's a hard-nosed player, but he's also an alternate captain for that team. The only other alternate captain this past season for the Pack was Alex Belzile, and he has now moved on. He signed a 2-year deal with Montreal, so he's gone. I would not be surprised in the slightest if Dowling ends up becoming the second alternate captain for the Hartford Wolfpack. I get the feeling they might even already have that in mind. I mean, who's to say for sure, but that would certainly stand to reason if they did that. One other note here, too. We talked about how Dowling does produce at the AHL level offensively. I mentioned Belzile a second ago. He left in free agency. So too did Bo Grew. Belzile has been the leading point getter for the Hartford Wolfpack in each of the last 2 seasons. And last season, Bo Grew was the second leading point scorer for the Hartford Wolfpack. So they got to try to replace that offensive production somehow. I mean, that's a team that struggled to score goals last season before they lost their top 2 scorers. And now Dowling is there. I get the feeling they see the Rangers see him, leading the way in the scoring department for the Hartford Wolfpack. Not to mention just being a veteran leader for the young guys and somebody that the Rangers could certainly call up to the NHL in a pinch. But if I had to bet on it, I would put money on Dowling probably opening up next season in a top 6 role with the Hartford Wolfpack. But it's a solid signing. I like this overall. There's certainly no risk to it. There's no reason not to do it. It's a solid NHL, AHL swingman that should be able to produce for the Wolfpack and can probably fill in a pinch for the New York Rangers. But we'll call it there. There are other free agents to discuss. Like I said, we're going to go through them very gradually, take our time with it, give all these guys a fair trial, talk about what they bring to the table. So one down with Justin Dowling, and we've got some others to talk about, moving forward here. But we'll call it there. If you guys would like to get in touch with this podcast, please send an email to lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Once again, that is lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Definitely give us a follow on Twitter as well, @jchick17. Once again, that is @jchik17. And definitely subscribe to Locked On New York Rangers YouTube channel. Thanks again, guys. I will see you next time.